dark side.
2, 1, 0.
Just to explain a little bit about those the last two clips you saw, Matthew Smith and Mel Croucher. What we've been doing is people have been very graciously pre-buying the film for quite some time now. So what we've decided to do is we've edited up 4 clips, 4 extended clips, which are effectively like game making of. One of them, 2 of them you've just seen, Matthew Smith on Manic Miner, Mel Croucher on Des Ex Machina, and we've also edited up Rob Hubbard talking about early coding, and a 4th one is David Braben on Elite. So these are 4 extended clips. They're around 6-7 minutes apiece. Basically from today onwards, anybody that pre-buys the film, whether that's digital download, DVD or the Blu-ray version, immediately receives a link to be able to download a bundle with those 4 clips in there in full HD. So we just thought it was a good idea to get those edited up so people could start having those. And perhaps it's a good time to also move on to the soundtrack of the film, which is actually being created by Rob Hubbard and Ben Dalglish, who is sitting to my left here now. We're going to have a little bit of a chat about what the soundtrack is. It's been coming along now for nearly pretty much all year, isn't it, guys? Yeah. And also, you heard, perhaps most of you heard at the very beginning of the set tonight, we played the opening, the main theme from the film, which is actually called The New Frontier. So I'm just going to ask Rob to perhaps explain, to have a little chat with me about exactly what the meaning is behind the name of the track. And some of you may in fact noticed that it had a sort of slight Wild West, spaghetti western sort of feel to it. You're probably thinking, what the hell's that got to do with the British games industry? Can we just play a little bit of that track again, the one marked up as CD, number 1. I will hand over to Rob in a set, I promise, but I think the reason that came about was when Nicola and I, obviously we've been filming nearly 80 odd interviews now, and one of the common lines that kept coming up over and over and over again, you know, and you wouldn't sort of put the words in their mouth, they would effectively say, oh, it was like the Wild West back then, or it was a new frontier, or we were like cowboys, or we were lawless, or making it up as we went along. That sort of, and when we were all sitting down discussing the soundtrack ages ago, we were sort of talking about some of the commonalities that were coming out of the interviews. So the music has very much organically come from those interviews, some of the sort of key themes that have been coming up. Because we don't, when we go into making a documentary, we have an idea of what we think we're going to get, but you never really know for sure until you start, you know, talking to people, because these people, it's their lives, it's the stories behind them. As I said, we're not making a 2-hour film of game making of. This is about the people behind the games and about moving the UK games industry forward from effectively nothing in the early 80s into something quite amazing. Right, I'm going to hand over to Rob, I promise. Rob, we just tell me a little bit about tell them a little about the thinking behind the New Frontier track.
Well, basically, you've said it all, because it was inspired by the idea of that Wild West. So, you know, it's a question of just trying to create all those elements and put them all together, and, you know, try to give it a bit of an 80s feel with the synth bass and that kind of element.
What other nods to the 80s have you dropped in there, would you say?
Well, there's a couple of sound effects as well that are, you know, kind of 80s sounding. and that's about it, really.
I think the first thing that I noticed was the sort of 8-bit gunshot, which just sort of, that was the first thing that struck me. I mean, also, Max Hall's been an integral part of the creation of the soundtrack. He's up on stage with us here. He's got just this amazing workshop of fantastic toys and audio equipment and everything else, and it's literally like sending these gentlemen into the sweet factory when they go in there. There's almost, you know, whatever they want to achieve. So Max has been an incredible part of that. And just to explain, as well as obviously we mentioned about the four-clip bundle for those that pre-buy the film. For those that are interested in Rob's music and Ben's music, we actually have quite a lot of the soundtrack done now. And we've actually launched, you can now pre-order the soundtrack. And obviously, if you pre-order it, again, from today onwards, from this moment onwards, you will receive a bundle, an audio bundle with the title track by Rob Hubbard. But also, I'm going to just hand over to Max to explain the other couple of components that are in the audio bundle, should you pre-order the soundtrack. So Max, we've got the main theme, which is in FLAC and MP3 format, which they've heard.
Yes, there's you'll get a FLAC format of the main theme. You'll get an MP3 format of the main theme as well. There'll also be a SID version of the track that's been done on a real Commodore 64. That'll be also a FLAC and an MP3 and a SID version to play it on the real thing or a SID player, and a program version which you can load onto your emulators or the real thing again, and you'll be able to listen to Rob's rendition in SID format basically, which is very interesting. I think it's just nice to get a new track on that format, which will basically give away if you pre-order the CD. So basically.
So the thing that's very important to Nicola and I is this film has only come about because of the generosity of the video game community, of fans such as yourselves, who, you know, pre-buying the film, supporting the Kickstarter, the Indiegogo campaign. We're those people are incredibly important to us because we wouldn't be here now without them. And I think the other thing is as well is Max was saying to me, look, you know, it's probably a great idea if we release some of this material in these formats because, you know, they're going to really get something out of it. So we are trying to sort of continue to provide stuff as we go along. We do have an end game in sight of January 2014 because we do want to finish it at some point. But just sticking on the soundtrack for a moment, if I could just hand over to Ben to just explain a little bit about what he's looking to do with his own stuff on the soundtrack.
Hello. Yeah, I'm trying to get back to the original SID stuff. Not necessarily writing a SID piece, but trying to recapture the whole sensibilities of working with limited things. You know, I'm restricting myself. It's so easy to walk into a studio, especially Max's studio, which is just full of synths, and go, oh, that's a big lovely sound. I can use some marvellous big synthy pads here and 14-piece drum kit and all the rest of it. Because that's so easy, I decided to take the hard way. So I'm very conscious of trying to write it, trying to get into the same state of mind as when I was writing music 25 years ago. Shut up!
I just want to say, Rob just said the word drugs.
To me,
that's something about the games industry that it's going to be a little bit more difficult with the film, is that when the camera gets shut off, that'll be 99.9% of the interviewees going, of course we're all completely
That's the 18 version, you understand. That's the DVD extras will be about the parties. No, because I mean this part of my big thing about this period is about how a lot of creativity comes out of the whole limited forces thing. It's very easy. Yes, again, when you're given 1,000 artists and musicians and all the resources that you want, voice acting talent and all the rest of it, to put together a huge thing. But then it becomes very corporate, in my views. It becomes very Hollywood. What I loved about that time was, as I was saying, about working with limitations stimulated you creatively. It meant you had to. You're working harder to get the results, you know, and the fact that you were putting in that work, it then came out in the music, you know. So yes, so the pieces that I'm writing for the film, they will be full-blown synthy scores, as it were, but in my head, it's almost the opposite. The way that I always used to write music was I would imagine it in my head, imagine an orchestral piece or imagine a rock band piece, and then I'd work out how it's going to fit into the three voices. And this way I'm doing it almost the other way around. I'm thinking, right, how is a three-voice piece going to work? Okay, once I've got that, then I can expand it out and use all the forces of Mac Studio, you know? But that was the appeal of doing it for me. That was it. Why this is, to be honest, the first time I've done any composing for a long time. This particular project appealed a lot because it was obvious that Nicola and Anthony had those same sensibilities. You know, they understood what it was about, and so that's why I think Rob and Max, we're all really happy to contribute to this, and really excited about what's going to happen at the end. So I can't wait to see the completed thing. I think I will finish my bloody pieces, haven't I?
Yeah. I think we always say this, that we feel very strongly about this film and the fact that this is the British story. This is something that it's about time that we sort of shouted out about this story and that it was recorded. And the more that we got told no by broadcasters that it was a niche story and it wasn't important, it just fueled us on. And normally you would think, oh, you would just stop and try and sort of not bite the hand that feeds. But in this instance, we felt so strongly that this was a story that needed telling. Because really very proud of it. And I appreciate that with any story there's some highs and lows and other things. But this particular story touched a whole generation of children, people that grew up through the 80s and 90s. And also, just very important to say, it's not just about the 80s. The film goes through the sort of first wave of developers, artists, musicians who sort of paved the way, and then in the later 80s we start getting the second wave, and then in the 90s the third wave, and each wave is inspired by what came before or what was going on in the rest of the world. And obviously once we get to sort of the mid-90s to the late 90s, there's a very, very, very strange set of circumstances and difficulties that face UK development, and that took a long time because that was a blank piece of paper for us. We had no idea what the main problems were, why we saw so many companies disappear, where it all went within a very, very short space of time. We now know what that is, and we are filmmakers, so we want to sort of hold something back and sort of say when the film comes out you'll find out, but we didn't know when we came into it, and we were quite surprised. We had an idea, but we were wrong. And when you interview 80 odd people, you then start to sort of pick through and realise, actually, that must be what happened, you know. So there we are. So just to sum up, before we open the floor up for a bit of Q&A, pre-orders of the film now, because obviously it's the very community that's helped us out so much. So that 4-clip bundle is now available for free, and also the soundtrack. Should you obviously be interested in those materials that come with it, those links get emailed out straight away. And also our website, you know, www.FromBedroomsToBillions.com, which Nicolas just whispered into my ear that I didn't write. We are also saying, people have been writing to us and sort of suggesting things to us and everything. We always try to reply. We're not as quick as we'd like to be because we're effectively always making the film, but you know, do keep writing to us. We've had some wonderful messages and support and other things. It means a lot. We do always make a point of writing back to everybody. So, you know, keep it up. Thanks very much. And I think we'll hand over to all of you. But thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. I think what we'll say, Ben just said let Rob have it. Basically, we haven't got monitors here, so it's hard. It's not all that easy to hear. So just sound your question out, who you're after, who you want to position your question to, and I'll just hand the mic to that person. All right? Away you go. Any questions? Hands up, and the mic will come to you.
Hi guys, look, first of all I just want to say thanks ever so much for you guys doing this film. It means a hell of a lot to a hell of a lot of us here, so really, really appreciate it. My question is for those of us that did Indiegogo and then Kickstarter, you said about the links about it. Will we be sent out those as well? Because some of us may have pre-ordered nice limited edition
Automatically,
CDs
yeah.
sort of stuff. So that'll all come out.
I'm glad you asked that. Just to get that absolutely clear and out of the way straight away, obviously it goes without saying, those links go out automatically to anybody that's already pre-bought the film. So it's just from this moment onwards it's set up. But yes, of course, it's, what's the word, retroactive? I can't. Basically everybody that's pre-bought it gets the links. So you should get those within 48 hours. If there's not, come and get me, all right?
Thanks, Andy.
Who's next?
Hello, this is to all of you really. I noticed in the talk, first of all, my backer of Kickstarter Indiegogo, so I'm really looking forward to this film. When I first saw it, yeah, this has to happen. But I want to ask about the indie game scene, because I interviewed Mike Bithell, Eurogamer, and he was talking about Thomas is Alone and how he's doing volume. And I just wanted to know, is there a circle of parallels of, I mean, he's working on his own virtually. He's contracting out some of the work, but he's on his own, and that's a lot of singular developers are reappearing now. And so I heard on the film that there's AAA games of hundreds of thousands of people, but there's now a lot of coders that work on their own, or 2 or 3 people. Is the film reflective of that current generation? I mean, Mike's in his 20s, for example, so it's really about the indie game scene right now. It's come to the fore with Sony and pushing that forward and that sort of thing. How is that reflected in this film? Because you did say you want to talk about contemporary issues.
First of all, I apologise because it's very hard to actually hear the mic because there's no monitors on stage. But if I'm going wrong, start shaking your head if I didn't hear the question right. But from what I heard, are we reflecting the indie game scene? And I would also add homebrew, other things in the film. The answer to that is 100% yes. Totally appreciate the clip that we showed, obviously looked at the AAA, but the reason for that was we wanted to show the sort of excess, the sort of absolute ridiculous end of the spectrum, so that, no pun intended, so that we could again go back to the late 70s and sort of show the complete difference. As the film goes on, the third act of the film basically deals very much with the sort of full circle of now we have indie gaming. And the thing is, homebrew never went away. It never went away. It supposedly became sort of less mass attention and all those other things. So it absolutely has to be represented in the film. And it comes in the third act to show that now, obviously, appreciate there is a huge amount of titles that get released on the indie scene, but it's still relevant, and it's still also one person or two-man team constructing games like that. Did I answer that okay?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah. Who's next?
Hi there, Anthony. I was wondering when you go out and meet these people who have lived this life in the 80s, what did they relive, not only playing the games, but what they experienced in the 80s around them as well? Did that come across on film?
I'm really sorry, Nicola heard you, so she's just going to tell me.
I think I heard you right. Was it about how they relived what it was like for them back in that day? And yeah, every single one sat there really and spoke extensively about what it was like for them back then, their experiences. So we've got so much of that footage, but obviously we haven't shown that today. But yes, that is thoroughly covered, so that will be in the film if that's happening.
Do you know something about sound? I think that's another thing about the interview. Well, I mean, it's different. The interviews, if anyone's wondering why we're suddenly acting very unprofessional on stage, Ben has just turned one of the speakers around to act as a monitor, so now we can hear ourselves 10 times louder, but we can hear you. When you're sitting there, most of the interviews lasted for around an hour and a half, sometimes more, sometimes a lot more. But effectively, we're not asking. The way we do the interviews is very much like a conversation, as if you're meeting somebody in the pub or something like that. So usually within 5-10 minutes, if they sort of have this sort of like script in their head as to what they were going to say, it just breaks down if they can't do it, and then they end up just becoming themselves. So the first sort of few questions we always ask are very deliberately sort of quite generic, so they have to sort of they can't really give forced opinions, and it sort of breaks them down, and then they relax, and then it becomes a proper interview. So we had an awful lot of you know, there were interviews where people were outpouring. There was several people that broke down. Matthew Smith's interview was very, very hard. It was the hardest interview we did. And, you know, obviously you can see from the clip that we showed that Matthew has not come through the last 30 years as well as he probably would have liked, but he's still around, and he's still very much, you know, he's very, very with it and able to give us a proper interview. And also he's at a point in his life when he's able to look back at what happened. So he's sort of out of the fog, as it were. So anyway, is there another question?
Hi there.
Hello there.
Steve Parkins. I've got a question for Ben and Rob. It's really interesting what you mentioned earlier about when you said that the game space in football, they've now got the bitmaps, they look much more like players and so on. It's interesting though to transfer that to the music, because the music now, they're like kind of Hollywood compositions in the music. I'd like to hear what your opinions are on modern games and modern music, if you think it's losing its way, or if you think it's actually helping. Whether in the past maybe children could project their own ideas on your music in the 80s, whereas now they don't have to think anymore. What's your opinion on that?
Rob just said, sucks.
He said what?
It sucks. A man of few words, but everyone is a gem. Do you want to start, Rob? I was saying this to a couple of chaps just earlier. I think part of when we started off, it was about trying to stimulate as many of the senses as possible. You know, that was the whole thing with the scoring for a game. So you get the score for the graphics, and the score for the music, and the score for the gameplay, and all these various elements were very important. And I always like to think that we wrote tunes, we wrote stuff to be listened to, and it was always, although it accompanied the game and it fitted with the game, you could listen to it separately, and many people still do. Whereas as soon as the big money and the big sound chips, as it were, started coming in, as soon as you could just go into a studio, record the music, slap it on a CD, again, a lot of the fun of the creativity went away. But also it started becoming more like movie score music. And the whole point about movie score music is that you're not supposed to listen to it. If you can, if you're aware of the music for a film, then it hasn't necessarily done its job, because the music for a film is all about sort of the subtle psychological heightening of atmosphere and all the rest of it, which is a great thing, but it's a different art to writing tunes. I often talk about the old grey whistle test, which was the whole thing in old studios about, after you've been recording a tune all day, you go and ask the doorman, say, can you whistle this tune? And if he could, then you knew it was going to be a hit, because people could sing it, you know. Whereas I was on the BAFTA jury last year for games music, and so I got to hear all of the best of the games music that came out last year, and it was all, I mean, it was stunningly produced stuff. You know, but it was, yes, you spend £1 million on hiring an orchestra and having 15 arrangers and all the rest of it. And it was very, very slick, but it only really worked in the context of the game. When I was playing the game, you go, oh, the music fits the game well, and part of the score, obviously, you know, was how well it worked with the game. But if you just listen to it on its own, it just became, it was dull. It was ambient music, and I've never been one particularly for ambient music. I like tunes. I like music that you can react to, and that spurred all sorts of different emotions on almost on a very obvious level, rather than somebody going, I'm working psychologically on your subconscious to make you feel happy or make you feel sad or something. Sod that, I want something that you can walk down the street and listen to, you know. So yes, I think I'm always very impressed with the best of modern game music, but I don't want to do it myself. Rob?
What I really hate about modern games, the music, is the trend that happened, started off with road race, where they licensed music, and so so you get this trend of licensing bands and getting cross-marketing thing going between the game and licensed music with various bands. And sometimes they're unknown bands will make it, really takes off. But in general, when I think it was FIFA Soccer in Canada, done by Electronic Arts, started hiring, licensing Robbie Williams, it's like, well, that's game over for me.
If I can just add to that, I think, would you also say that when you were working on the SID chip, it was the limitations of that, effectively the SID is an instrument, you consider it an instrument, it has its limitations, but you never quite know how far you can take it. Do you think that sort of encouraged you to keep them as tunes and then see what sort of elaborations you can create on that SID? It must have been, almost the limit of the SID was almost freed you, if that makes any sense. Would you agree with that?
Back then was that you were aware that you put a game on, there's this piece of music that keeps playing all the time, and so you were like really forced to try to write not just an A and a B section, but A, B, C, D, and an E section of the music, because it was going to drive them absolutely nuts if you didn't, and the parents would go down and just throw this thing out the window. So you have this mindset that you must write, A, B, C, D, E, and an F section for a tune, and try and come up with all these different ideas and stretch the thing out to 12 minutes or something to stop it from being boring. That was basically, you were always thinking in terms of melody all the time to try to do it.
Another question, anybody?
Hi guys. How easy or difficult was it to track down the guys who actually wanted to interview? And even then, once you actually track them down, did some of them, were they reluctant to, have they disassociated themselves from the industry at that point?
Bloody nightmare. I think one of the 18 months we've been doing this now, so we're nearly there. We've got a couple of surprises left. There's a couple of interviews that we were told would be impossible to get that we're pretty much secured now. More on that later, not today. But if I just say, these gentlemen here, for example, Ben we hijacked, that show, he knew nothing about it. We were at the show, the BBC were there as well, weren't they? So we wanted to talk to him. So he probably thought we were the BBC for a little while. No BBC joke check. And then we just suddenly, before we knew it, we sit in the chair and I want to talk about this. And an hour went by and then suddenly he'd done the interview. So we hijacked then. Rob said no, first of all, and then no again, and then no again, and then eventually we entered into a dialogue, and when he realised that it was I'd like to think that when he realised that it was a proper film and what we were all about, what we were trying to achieve, came along, and then through Rob, Martin Galway came along, Fred Gray recently, his part. So what tended to happen, a sort of domino effect, is that once you have interviewed somebody, another one comes up. For example, Peter Molyneux had declined us very early on, but it wasn't Peter himself, it was somebody in his office. But when we interviewed Ian Livingstone, who agreed very quickly, because he's a real advocate for promoting the UK games industry, and I have to say Ian has actually been incredibly helpful all the way through the production. Ian said to us, the interviews we were taking his mic off, "Oh, have you interviewed Peter Molyneux yet?" So we said, "No," he said, "No. We wondered if he was camera shy." We know he's not, but we said that, and Ian goes, "Peter not in this, he'd be really, pissed off." And then literally the next day, email from Peter's people, he'd like to do the interview. He just hadn't been told, his people hadn't told him about it, so he did the interview and he was absolutely brilliant. So to sum up your question, every interview has been different. Some people have been very difficult to get, they've taken a lot of persuasion. Some people have come to us. That's not an arrogant, but literally they've come to us saying, "Would you like some archive?" or "I like what you're doing," or something like that. And then we said, "Oh, you were on our list, we were going to come to you," and then we've gone and done the interview. So it's been a sort of lot of different things like that. Some people have been very, very difficult to find. It's not everyone's on LinkedIn or Facebook, or you actually need to do some sort of journalism, investigative journalism to find people. I'll probably on the DVD extras go through how we found Matthew Smith. Probably, does anyone remember Level 9 Text Adventures, how we found him? That was a fun story. question, anybody? Oh, we've lost one time actually. Does anybody have any more questions? We're going to have to wrap up in a couple of minutes. We've got one more question here, gentleman waving his arm there.
Well, it's a question for Ben and Rob. What's your favourite tune that you created back in the day, most you're proud of, and why? That's a pretty tough question, because some of the stuff was good and some of it was rubbish, so it wasn't that one. For me, I would say the Sanction and the Ken Tiller stuff was probably my favourite. There's a few others as well. Probably those.
So, which is your favourite child? Well, I always said the trap was the one that I think writing trap was a special thing, just because of the fact that we did it all with the animation and the demo as well. I was like that, and but all my bouncy stuff actually, when I listen back to it now, you know, the things that I think that I would have been proud of 25 years ago, now, if you see what I mean, I'm not necessarily the ones that when I listen back that I like the most. I was listening to a Hungarian band's cover of Krakow the other day, and I thought, whoa, that's a great tune. Oh, I'm really glad I wrote that, you know. Incredibly surprised that Hungarian rock bands are playing it 25 years later, to be perfectly honest. But yes, I mean, I always think of trap as being my magnum opus. Yes, yeah, that's the one.
So it sounds like plugging like mad here, but on the soundtrack, there's on the soundtrack album, there's a 25-minute making of documentary, which you've actually been shooting all the way along. We were actually hoping to have some clips of it here, but we just time we had interviews and other things to shoot, so we'll release some on the website very, very soon. We've got some fantastic stuff, even Rob playing piano with his feet, all sorts of stuff. But on that, we've also got Ben playing guitar to track, which if you remember we shot. Do you remember that? You ended up just strumming along and then suddenly did the whole track. So while trap's playing in the background. So we've got some wonderful sort of and as I say, just hop along to the website, and if you don't feel like buying the film, just sign up to the mailing list, and we're going to be moving the whole Indiegogo Kickstarter and everything into one master mailing list. We've been saying this for ages, but we're finally going to do it now. So that would be a way of obviously keeping abreast of everything else. And I think we better round up now before we get the hook then. But thank you so much for coming and listening to us and watching the film, and obviously if you pre-bought the film or sent us emails before, thank you. It really, really means a lot to us. So thank you very much indeed.